I now call upon Mr. Devapriya to the stage to share a few insights as to what it was like to biographize the life of a truly enigmatic individual. Over to you, Mr. Devapriya.
Thank you, Sairu. Members of the Reverend Clergy, the Minister of Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, Justices of the High Courts and District Courts, President's Councils, Honorable Leader of the Opposition, valued academics, former ministers, members of the legal profession, members of the Choksy family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. When K.N. Choksy passed away on February 5th, 2015, 2 days prior to his 82nd birthday, Sri Lanka had just celebrated its 67th Independence Day. It had been 5 years since Mr. Choksy had retired from parliamentary politics and his legal practice. By the time of his passing, he was giving the occasional consultation and advice to his clients. Apart from this, he was spending his time with his family, including his grandchildren. Mr. Choksy's death did not go unnoticed. Over the next few weeks, newspapers carried numerous tributes to and obituaries on him. All of them underlined his political and legal career, the many achievements he clinched as a parliamentarian. It was noted that he held not one, but 2 important portfolios, that of Constitutional and State Affairs in 1993, and that of Finance between 2001 and 2004. It was also noted that he had created history within his community, the Parsi community, as the first MP from among them. Ladies and gentlemen, in more ways than one, K.N. Choksy came from an established family and a respected lineage. Today, the Parsis of Sri Lanka number around 40. At the height of the British Empire, in India and Ceylon, they wielded a formidable influence. As traders and businessmen, they found opportunity wherever they landed. They were highly committed to their way of life, their traditions, their culture, their rites and rituals. Over time, they prospered in trade and commerce and became fervent patrons of their faith. Yet, despite being fervent, committed members of their community, the Choksys differed somewhat from the majority of their compatriots. They expanded into other fields and professions. Mr. K.N. Choksy's father, N.K. Choksy, Queen's Counsel, for instance, branched out into law at a time when law had become a lucrative profession in the island of Ceylon, even if the Parsi community did not particularly look up to it. Several decades later, his son made history by branching out into another field that his community had never considered, let alone entered, politics. In this, both father and son matched each other well. They prospered in both fields and created a precedent in their community. K.N. Choksy's record as a minister and a lawyer was, if not unimpeachable, certainly remarkable. In this, he was following a family tradition. His father had created history within his community as the first Parsi advocate in Sri Lanka, then British Ceylon. It was an unspoken rule in the family that while the father would do everything he could to educate their children, the children would have to find work and tenure on their own. Thus, after K.N. Choksy completed his education at the Ceylon, later Sri Lanka Law College, he distanced himself from his father's practice. In that regard, K.N. Choksy was, on all counts, a highly consequential figure. But he was also something of an enigma, as Sairu pointed out. Unlike many of his colleagues in the profession, he did not leave behind an extensive collection of diaries and personal correspondences. He clearly did not feel the need to express in words what he felt, thought, and put into action. The key to his thoughts, his beliefs, and his work, then, lies in official documents and personal reminiscences and recollections. What I have attempted in this book is to incorporate as much as possible of both sources, combining them with newspaper reports, articles, and other secondary material. Ladies and gentlemen, autobiographies, at the end of the day, are exercises in vanity. Biographies, I must say, are a little different. But even with biographies, the author is faced with the difficult challenge of determining what to include and what to leave out, what to emphasize, and in a manner of speaking, what to suppress. There are some individuals in Sri Lanka who constantly get written about. Presidents and prime ministers, politicians, sportsmen, and artists. Over the last few decades, we have witnessed a slow but sustained accumulation of biographies, coffee table books, and the like on these individuals. As information has become more freely available, particularly online, it has become easier to write on anyone. With the opening up of institutions like the National Archives, it has become easier to do research. As a result, what was once a genre limited or restricted to a few, political biography, has become accessible for the many. This is particularly so with regard to the legal profession in Sri Lanka. The history of the legal profession in Sri Lanka remains uncharted and unresearched, as yet. It was one of the most sought after professions in colonial society. Both NK and KN Choksy entered it at a time when important changes were making themselves felt. I have tried to capture some of these changes, including the many shifts that KN Choksy lived through in my book. Part of my motivation has been to encourage other writers and historians to come up with a definitive account of the legal profession in this country. Once we take this into account, ladies and gentlemen, KN Choksy ceases to be just another lawyer. He becomes, as his father did before him, a part of our contemporary history. Perhaps the biggest challenge I've had to face in writing this book is not so much that the subject is no longer alive, as that there are so many aspects to his character that at one level seem difficult to reconcile with each other. Happily for me and for the family of KN Choksy, all the people interviewed were able to give a solid, if nuanced, portrait of the man. We have happily been able to piece together all these perspectives into a coherent whole. I have tried to provide a balanced perspective throughout my book. There are episodes in any individual's life which tend to give rise to often polarizing debates and discussions. Mr. Choksy's life was hardly an exception to this. I realized that certain events and incidents can be viewed from other angles. What I have done in my book is to prioritize Mr. Choksy's perspective, bearing in mind that it may not be the sole or even main perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, a book of this sort cannot be written in isolation. I have mentioned the many people who contributed to the writing in the acknowledgements, which you will see once you get your copy of the book. The Choksy family, first and foremost, went out of their way to coordinate the whole project. And those who gave us time for interviews were extremely helpful in every possible way. I'm also utterly grateful to my assistant, Manusha Gunaratna. Manusha was only a schoolboy of 18, bright, brash, sharp-tongued, always ready with a reply, when I first met him in 2018. Something of a misfit at the time, he has evolved into a much more thoughtful individual, going out of his way to help and to please. Last year, reflecting on my former assistant, Utpala Vijay Surya, who is now studying at the University of Peradeniya and the Law College and thankfully is here with us today, I noted that while I hired him intending to teach him, I actually ended up learning from him. I can unequivocally say the same of Manusha. I have tried valiantly to teach him, and just as valiantly, I have failed. Ladies and gentlemen, when writing on a person who has long passed away, there's always the danger of reading into the subject, of assuming what he did and what he would and should have done at a particular time and place. I have tried to avoid this as much as I can. To that end, I'm immensely grateful to Mr. V.K. Choksy, President's Counsel, and Mrs. Sirini Choksy, to Shania Choksy and Arish Choksy, for going through my drafts again and again, and for making suggestions and recommendations. From the first day onwards, in early 2024, the Choksy family became heavily involved and invested in this project. My book is a labor of love as much for me as it is for them, and as much a tribute to the subject as to his family, his children, and of course, his grandchildren. Thank you.